I'm Hugh Hewitt. I don't know what happened, so let's talk to somebody who will. Michael Barone, the Dean of American Political Analysts, joins us this morning. Good morning, Michael.
Hey, good morning, Hugh. How you doing, kid?
I'm disappointed, but then again, I've been worse. I've been better and I've been worse. Tell us what happened, Michael.
Well, did you deliver Trumbull County for J.D. Vance?
I did. We worked hard on that, and J.D. won fairly comfortably. Mike DeWine delivered for J.D. Vance. That's what happened there.
Well, I'll tell you what I think happened. I think that what we saw was American voters repudiated the two most recent American presidents, Donald Trump and Joe Biden. The Democrats lost the House majority. They've gone from 235 seats when Biden was the anointed nominee down towards 211 or lower. It looks to me like the Republicans will get a majority in the Senate, but a bare majority. And I think they repudiated Donald Trump. I mean, you saw what happened to the Trump-backed Senate candidates underperformed. The people who put money in for the primaries and publicity and then didn't put any money in the general election. Blake Masters seems to be behind in Arizona, a state that the Republicans won every Senate race from 1992 to 2016. You have Mehmet Oz lost in Pennsylvania, where the other candidate, Dave McCormick, would have probably won against a guy who was incapable of debating. I think Adam Laxalt will come through in Nevada, but he had a previous history prior to Trump. And J.D. Vance won in Ohio, a state that Trump carried by 8 points. He seems to have carried it by 7, which suggests something in the nature of a declining appeal. And he ran 9 points behind Governor Mike DeWine. So, I think that, the big winner, Ron DeSantis. In the third and eighth largest states in the country, Ron DeSantis and Brian Kemp. Ron DeSantis, called Ron DeSanctimonious by Trump, won by 59-40. You have to go back to 1982 to get a Florida governor winning by that kind of a margin. You remember 2000, Hugh, staying up for days and days, waiting for Florida being the closely divided country. It looks like Ron DeSantis won by a larger margin than Gavin Newsom won in California, and much larger margin than Kathy Hochul won in New York. If you add up, by the way, the top 10 states for governor governor election results, substituting the Senate race in North Carolina, which doesn't have a governor election this year. Basically, the Republicans got 51% of the votes for governor in the 10 largest states, and the Democrats 48. We've been hearing since 2000 that, the Republicans are just winning in small states and rural areas. That's an isolated part of America. The top 10 states produced for Republican governors. And why did they do that? Because Republican governors like Ron DeSantis produced for them. And Brian Kemp, who was one of those who lifted the COVID lockdown restrictions and insisted on school openings. DeSantis did this in a very public way and under great criticism, with the national press coming in and saying about how he was going to kill everybody in Florida. The data shows that the state, which has the second highest percentage of elderly people, did not have anything like an exaggerated death rate, did well. They protected their elderly while allowing other people to go on and making a living. By the way, if you look at the exit polls in Florida, Hugh, what I'm at least, and all these data are a little bit preliminary, but what I'm seeing is that Hispanics in Florida, 52-45 Republican. Black Americans in Florida, 16% Republican. You get slightly lower percentages in Georgia. That looks like a future Republican natural majority. We've been having all this debate about who won the 2016 election. We had election deniers like Hillary Clinton, who won the 2020 election deniers like Donald Trump. How about if you win an election by 59-40, the way that Ron DeSantis won it in a state that used to be 50-50? You don't have a lot of election deniers around when you win 59-40, when you carry Hispanic Hispanic Americans, when you run 1 out of 6 Black Americans, and so forth. When you've produced things, when you got the Pine Island Bridge running up and running after 3 days, and the Sanibel Bridge after 2 weeks, when you produce, and not just talk about building a wall, but when you build the equivalent of a wall, when you do things and accomplish things in government, show you can deliver, you can win by a majority that looks like it commands a national majority, if not forever and ever, and I don't think anybody gets a national majority forever and ever, but for a good while.
So Ron DeSantis is the star of the night, and Marco Rubio wrote in on his excellent campaign. You think Republicans have enough to say that it's going to be Speaker McCarthy?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I've been looking through the election returns, and I've been prowling through the New York Times' excellent presentations of results. Of course, we should give the Times credit for some of the good things that it does, while complaining and bellyaching about it the way the New Dealers used to bellyache about the Chicago Tribune, which was the great national paper in those days. Yeah, I think they win enough for Speaker McCarthy, but they don't win a lot, and I think that Republicans threw away a lot of House seats that they could have won. You look at Florida, the delegation's going to be 20 Republicans, 8 Democrats.
By the way, that is Ron DeSantis, too. We would not have the House if we get the House, except for Ron DeSantis playing hardball on the map.
Well, and I guess the other thing is that if you look at, the Senate candidates, Pennsylvania, it appears that the Democrats held on to the 7th and 8th. Those are the kind of blue-collar districts that supposedly Trump was going to deliver on, but Trump and Mehmet Oz were not able to deliver on them there. These are results that are etched in stone. This is, Ohio. Marcy Kaptur held on. I'm a kind of an admirer of Marcy Kaptur.
She is invincible. She's there year in and year out. They can redraw her district, but we also lost one because of a stolen valor candidate.
What's the 13th district?
Right.
Yeah, I mean, the fact is that even with a when you have a Republican redistricting plan and you can't hold a district like that, you've got a problem. And so you've got that you see this in districts. I think, I haven't counted them up yet, but I think somewhere between 1 dozen and maybe 12.5 House districts, 12 to 18, were booted by having candidates that are concentrating on obeying Trump's summons to relitigate the 2020 election and not talking about 2023 and 2024 and what America can be in the years ahead. The fact is that at this point, if Republican voters take a look at it, I think they should see that Trump is a candidate of the past and that relitigating the past is a losing effort.
No, I want to get your assessment.
Future.
Wisconsin looks solid for Ron Johnson. He's pulled it off again. Pennsylvania and Arizona look solid for the Dems. So they have picked up one there, and they're holding on to one in Arizona. We're down to Georgia and Nevada. Georgia probably going to a runoff. It's impossible to say. With Republicans at the top of that state and an election being reformed there, it's impossible to say. But let's say it goes to a runoff. Let's say Adam Laxalt holds on. First of all, do you think Adam Laxalt holds on this late in the night?
I think Adam Laxalt holds on. I'm kind of basing that on the Nevada journalist John Ralston saying that turnout for the Republicans on Election Day looked to be pretty better than he thought it was going to be. We'll see how that goes. By the way, that's another state where basically the Democrats' margin used to come from Latinos and Asians, so low-income Filipinos and other Asians in Nevada. Those margins are vastly decreased according to the exit poll, and the movement towards Trump from people that the analysts call, right to Shara calls, not people of color, but normies, normal people who want normal things, and
including normie people of color. I think normie is a racial term. It's just sort of middle-of-the-road people who don't pay much attention to politics.
People who play by the rules, earn a living, raise their families, contribute to communities, and want to have opportunities for others to do so.
Now, in North Carolina, Ted Bunn won handily. That was never in doubt. And so it does go. He's also an experienced congressional member of Congress.
Yeah.
Nominate someone with experience, you win a tight election. Nominate someone without it, you make mistakes and you lose in Pennsylvania. I also think, and I want to test this out on you, Michael, I've said for a year and a half, Josh Shapiro is the most talented Democrat in the United States. He crushed it in Pennsylvania yesterday over Doug Mastriano, who's never been on this show because I just think he's a terribly flawed candidate. I had Don Baldock on just to try and take one for the team, and I thought he was in the running. He did not come close. It's not close.
It's not close. And Maggie Hassan was a candidate who didn't face the press and who won by 1,017 votes 6 years ago. If you can't beat a candidate, you can't get 1,018 more votes than a candidate like that. I think you got a real problem there. And so
when your governor is running up a double-digit win, Sununu could have won that seat, but he chose not to.
Well, you ought to try. I ought to try the governor of Colorado, Jared Polis. I think a smart guy, and I think the Democratic governor-elect Josh Shapiro of Pennsylvania looks like a smart guy. That are not drinking all the Biden Kool-Aid. Interesting people in interesting states, but that helped to prevent the Republicans have held that seat in Pennsylvania, that Senate seat, since 1968, since Dick Schweiker beat Joseph Clark. I don't know if you were following that election.
No.
I know why. Well, I was. I mean, come on.
A benefit of remembering these things that I don't, but that is a long way back.
Yeah, and so, Joe Clark could have been elected mayor of Philadelphia in 1951, which you probably don't remember either. But anyhow, this is a seat that they had no business losing, I give Dr. Oz credit for a lot of personal campaigning, running over the 67 counties in the Keystone State, but it wasn't enough, and he should not have talked about crudités.
No, that was an early mistake, and there may have been some sympathy, but mostly I'm putting that down to Josh Shapiro carrying Fetterman over the line, Fetterman Kerry style. Hey, Michael, I got to go. Thank you. Follow him at Michael Barone on Twitter because he's still the Dean of American Political Analysts, and you just heard him explain it right there. Thank you, Michael. Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt on a disappointing morning for Republicans, although Susan Crabtree of Real Clear Politics just tweeted out that some of us stayed up all night in Nevada so you didn't have to. Just after 1 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, and for the Steelers fans, that would be 4 a.m. Cheers broke out at Red Rocks Hotel, where the Laxalt Lombardi party had ended with a toss-up whimper. Big shift, Laxalt now in the lead by 20,000 votes. But 25% of the votes still outstanding. David Drucker joins us. David, what happened?
Hugh, I'm not sure yet. I'm a little bit. It's one of the most stunningly unexpected elections I've ever covered. It did not follow to type in that either we've seen a president with low approval ratings just get straight up rebuked, or we've seen congressional majorities overreach in how they treat a president, a la 1998 and 2002, and therefore go against the grain and support the party in power. And in this case,
it is a very 2002 election, but that had 9/11 in it.
It is. It also didn't have, the Democratic Party refusing to support a Homeland Security bill, creating a new agency where they were fighting for the rights of unions, and George W. Bush was, on the side of this is all about national security, and we can't get into that kind of fight. You had a very popular president in the aftermath of 9/11. Here, every fundamental of this election was with the Republicans. And so as I've looked at this initially, what I see are something that is an old tried and true rule of politics, which is candidate quality matters. And what you talk about matters. And, when Mitch McConnell late in the summer expressed concern about the quality of the candidates Republicans had nominated, particularly, he didn't say it this way, but he was talking about candidates endorsed and pushed across the finish line in these primaries by Donald Trump. He clearly was onto something. And
now,
I wonder.
The former president did not talk about what we expected him to talk about last night. Do you think he's reassessing his 2024 plans right now?
Well, I think that in any normal universe, the idea that you're going to announce on the heels of an election like this, where the candidates you pushed and the messaging that you helped influence fell flat, that's really something to do. And the idea that other Republicans interested in the White House, and you know them, Hugh, and you know that they want it, would just simply step aside or step gingerly after I don't even know what to call it. That would make absolutely zero sense. I can't wait to see what I hear and learn at the Republican Jewish Coalition Conference in Las Vegas at the end of next week, because a good dozen of them are going to be there. Trump will not. And there is a lot of reassessing that needs to happen. I don't know that it's so much the Republican policy message, but I wonder if Republican candidates, thinking they had a 2010 historic tsunami on their hands, got a little too caught up talking about how they were going to investigate Joe Biden and Hunter Biden and all of those sorts of activities they were going to get involved in, rather than saying what you would usually hear, which is, no, we have no interest in this. We're going to deal with gas prices and inflation and all of that. Clearly, they talked about that, but there was an overhang of, we're also going to go after this president. It seemed de rigueur, because that's the way congressional majorities act these days when they have a president of the opposite party. We saw it with Trump and the Democrats, et cetera. But I'm searching for answers here. Part of it are the candidates, but part of it has to be some of this messaging, because Democratic candidates that were on their heels in all sorts of districts, forget the Senate races right now, where you can have ticket splitting still, not a lot, but you can have it, where candidate quality really does matter because you're running statewide. But if you look at what happened in these House races, there was just no tailwind, none. And if Kevin McCarthy gets his majority, I still think he's more likely to get it than not. It could end up being as thin as Nancy Pelosi's.
Well, Nancy Pelosi got a lot done, and the key thing is, if they all hang together, they won't hang separately. There are a couple of outliers in the party. If you've got a majority of one, then Marjorie Taylor Greene is your party. Did Lauren Boebert lose last night?
I haven't caught up on that. I woke up a little while ago. I was up until 3:30 Eastern.
You and me both. But we're not going to get done counting in California for 5 days. That's the problem.
No.
And we're not going to know those races. So I don't know that they'll be able to call the House for 5 days. It might be next week. How do you feel about Adam Laxalt with a 20,000 vote lead?
Well, it depends. Look, I think the fact that he's ahead and near 50% is something Republicans can be encouraged about, but there are outstanding votes. And the thing about elections, it's as if you're watching a football game or a basketball game where the plays get all jumbled up and they're not in order. I don't know right now where the votes are out that need to be counted, and if they're, traditional Democratic mail or Republican election day drop off. Was Laxalt getting some crossover votes from voters who typically vote for Democrats? Because, Nevada was looking very good for Republicans heading into election day. So I can't answer that yet because I don't know where the votes are that are out.
All right, David Drucker, we will continue to check in with you probably on Monday, by which point we'll have a clarity. More phone calls coming up. America, Bonjour, hi, Canada. I'm Hugh Hewitt, and the Republicans have very little to cheer about this point. I'm not sure they're going to get the House. I really am not sure. The California districts they're counting on will not be over for a week, maybe two. The Arizona districts they are counting on, that might not be over for weeks, maybe two. But Byron York will have a crystal ball handily. He will tell us what's going to happen. Byron York joins us from the Washington Examiner and Fox News. And Byron, look at that crystal ball of yours, and what do you see?
Good morning, Hugh. Well, I think the Republicans do win control of the House. Obviously, it's a much smaller majority than they were hoping for, but I think they do. As far as the Senate is concerned, obviously it's all down to two races right now, Nevada and Georgia. And, it looks, I think Michael Barone was saying he thought that Laxalt was going to hang on in Nevada, which means that it's all about, and if he loses, if Laxalt loses, then you can forget it. I mean, the Republicans do not win control of the Senate. But if Laxalt wins, then you go to Georgia, there's a runoff. and it all depends on
Who shows up?
on that. And and this libertarian candidate in Georgia got 2.1% of the vote, so he won't be in the race in the runoff on December 6th. So I've been thinking. I mean, I started thinking pretty early last night about how Republican optimism is. Me talking to people, listening to people, watching the polls. Republican optimism just grew and grew. As September ended, certainly they felt like this whole there had been this Democratic bump after the Dobbs decision, but the laws of gravity had reasserted themselves. The economy, inflation were the big issues, and they just became more and more confident. First, second, third, fourth week of October, and they were telling me, it's going to be 52, 53, 54 seats in the Senate, that this wave that was building in the House was going to carry along some of these Senate candidates. They were not talking just about the toss-ups of Georgia, Pennsylvania, Arizona, and Nevada. They were saying, we may win New Hampshire. It's looking really good in New Hampshire. We may pick up Washington State. Tiffany Smiley's run a great campaign, which she did, in Washington State. And it really came crashing down. It all came crashing down on election night. Don Bullock did not get anywhere close to winning in New Hampshire. Tiffany Smiley.
He lost by 12 points. I want people to know that, because our friend Mark Levin is mad at McConnell and Rove, but I mean, you lose 12 points. That's not a few extra dollars on TV, Byron.
No, it's not close. And then, Tiffany Smiley, who had impressed a lot of people and has a future in the Republican Party, didn't come anywhere close to beating Patty Murray in Washington State. And then, in the big marquee races, obviously Dr. Oz lost in Pennsylvania. And there were a lot of Republicans who looked at that October 25th debate between Oz and John Fetterman and said, look, this is over. And Oz did get stronger in the polls. This is another one of these postmortem races where we're going to have to look at the polls. Why did we know what we thought we knew? And then, I think you remarked earlier, or Michael did, J.D. Vance performed weaker than expected, but he won in Ohio. And then it looks like Blake Masters is lost in Arizona. And a lot of people that Republicans were placing confidence in just didn't do well. People are going to have to assess the Trump factor in some really big races. Trump pushed candidates who won won Republican primaries, but then lost in the general election. And now you have Trump actually trying to threaten the really brightest spot out of the whole race, which is Ron DeSantis, who wins big in Florida, is in kind of peak power right now, and is in a clearly solid position to run for president. And you have Trump telling reporters on the record, face to face, if he runs, meaning DeSantis. If he did run, I'll tell you things about him that won't be very flattering. I know more about him than anybody other than perhaps his wife, who is really running his campaign. I think if he runs, he could hurt himself very badly. So, Republicans are going to have to think whether Trump is a factor that they want to continue to be so influential in Republican politics as they consider 2024. So it's still early after this, and we're still kind of digesting a lot of what's going on. But those are my early thoughts.
Now, I am curious about why you think the Republicans get the House. Now, I don't trust the New York Times on their news reporting, but I do take a look at
the needle.
At the needle. And the needle says we will probably get the House with something like what the Democrats have now, a very narrow margin. Can Kevin McCarthy govern, given that he's got a fringe that is very loud and very popular among the fringe?
You mean as opposed to Republicans having a majority and then Nancy Pelosi remains Speaker? I mean, I think he becomes Speaker of the House. I think he'd rather be a Speaker of the House in a John Boehner sense, having to deal with just a really difficult minority of his conference. I think he'd rather do that than not be Speaker of the House. But I think it's going to bring us everybody back to the period when Boehner was Speaker, and the conservative group inside the Republican conference just gave him fits on everything. Things like the government shutdown. That was 2013, I think. Defunding Obamacare. All sorts of things that they were very big on that just made life really, really difficult for John Boehner, made him want to have another glass of red wine, and you could see that happening again.
If he wins that, there won't be an expansion of the Supreme Court, and I don't think the Democrats are going to get rid of the filibuster in order to pass stuff that won't pass in the House. So we'll have a stalemate if he wins the House. But I just am not that sure, Byron, that we're going to get the House.
Look, nobody can say with certainty. I'm saying I think they're going to win, but I'm not going to bet my own house on it. Okay, I'm not going to bet my life savings on this. So we're just going to have to see. But I do think it's important for you to point out that if Republicans win with a 5-seat majority, like what Democrats have now, the Joe Biden's legislative agenda, if there is such a thing, is dead. It's not going to happen. The one thing that Republicans would unite completely on is that any big legislative initiative that Biden and Democrats want to push is not going to happen. So, I mean, the two big things that were at stake here in Congress were if Republicans win even one House of Congress, then Biden's legislative agenda is dead. If they win the Senate, then it becomes very, very difficult for Biden to pass, to confirm his nominees, especially if there were a Supreme Court vacancy or some other really big job he's trying to get a controversial person into. That becomes extremely difficult for him. So
if it's 50-50, if it's 51-49, I do think they're going to start running a rather regular Senate and pushing things through for test votes in the House and dying in conference, and we're going to be back to the Boehner Speaker years, which is a grind, right? Just an absolute grind.
Well, I mean, you compare the grind. Let's say we have a Boehner-esque grind for the next 2 years compared to the last 2 years when you had a Democratic majority in House and Senate.
Better for everyone. Now, let's talk about the Red Mirage. Joe O'Dea got smoked. All right, I thought he was a great candidate. He lost by 228,000 votes. He lost by 12%, and they're still counting there. Blake Masters is not going to be close. Who disappoints you the most? Not disappoint. What surprised you the most on this map last night?
I don't think any of these people losing, O'Dea, Masters, Bolduc, Oz, I don't think any of them losing actually surprised me. I think some of the margins surprised me because I had been talking to Republicans who were actually involved in these races and felt that it was going to be much closer, but clearly it wasn't.
It was not, and we are waiting on the House. Byron York will be back again to talk to us after a few more days when we have some more results. But don't be surprised if Speaker Pelosi is back. It's like a Freddy movie, State the Beltway reeling. But luckily, I have Henry Olson to walk me through what happened. Henry, of course, for the Ethics and Public Policy Center, one of the best that there is at doing what we just did, analyze elections. Henry, what happened?
Well, the Democrats were able to convince enough independents who didn't like Joe Biden to hold their nose and vote for the party one more time to keep people they didn't like out of office. And unfortunately, the people they didn't like were people that you and I do like.
Yeah. I also think something Blake wrote from Politico. Politics is not a profession, but it is a craft, and you have to practice that craft to get good at it. I'm not sure the nominees were that great on the Republican side. We thought maybe the wave would carry over some flawed nominees. We were wrong.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. That it was clear that there were a lot of flawed nominees that were foisted upon the party in the primary process, and I thought, as many in the party thought, that the overwhelming trends would be enough to carry them over the line, and we were just wrong. That there's plenty of examples where decent candidates won pretty well, and poor candidates did worse than expected, and that's a message that everyone ought to take home.
Yeah, I think Ted Budd winning in North Carolina is and Ron Johnson, Wisconsin, is the testament to actually knowing how to campaign and doing it well and not making mistakes. But what about Adam Laxalt? Are you feeling good about that, bad about that, or don't know?
I'm not going to call the race, but I'm feeling good about it. I'm feeling good about it because he's up by about 30,000 votes. There's lots of Republican votes out left, and what that means is that late arriving mail ballots are going to have to break incredibly for Cortez Masto. And it's possible, but not likely.
Not likely. Okay, so that is, I'm going to take that to the bank and put us back at a 50-50 Senate. I'm going to take
So
that and
you'll
put that.
call it even if I won't, okay?
Yeah, because I'm just going to go with, mildly optimistic. I need some good news. But now, does Warnock pull it out in Georgia to avoid a runoff?
No. Warnock is going to go to a runoff, and so we get to go down to Georgia in the first week of December and play 2021 all over again.
You know, I've got a studio down there, AM 920, The Answer, and I cover the state. And Herschel may be calling in the next segment to tell us what he thinks. How do you read those libertarian votes, and what do you think about turnout? Because it's going to be the most expensive runoff in history. It's going to dwarf 2 years ago.
It's going to dwarf 2 years ago, and I think, first of all, if the Nevada race gets called in the next week and a half, then everyone will know that Senate is up for grabs. And I think that's going to drive turnout through the roof. R's will come out of the woodwork. D's will come out of the woodwork. And then the question is, do people want to give Joe Biden that sort of power again? And I think that's the message that needs to be driven home again and again and again. And it would be very nice if Donald Trump shut his mouth up and didn't show up.
That's not going to happen.
Okay, well, then that's going to put the seat at risk, because one thing that's clear is that it doesn't help the party when he's the focus, and the Democrats want to make him the focus. And he energizes a lot of people, but he really antagonizes a lot of people.
So if you were running it's a 4-week campaign. I think you'd want the former president, to come in the first week and say, Herschel is still my guy, and then you'd want him to go away. And then you'd want every other Republican in the country to go there and live there.
You know, Hugh, that's the perfect way to do it, is get him out of the way early, because he's got to come in, and then keep him out of the way for the last 3 weeks and let everyone else do the argument. I think that's the perfect way to handle it.
All right. Now, Henry, you've been studying, you've been up all night. I got 2 hours of sleep, so I'm reeling a little bit here. But talk to me a little bit about the House. Kevin McCarthy said last night, we will wake up to a Republican House. We haven't woken up to a Republican House. It's not over.
It's not over. It leans pretty strongly in favor of Republicans, but the House majority is going to be really narrow if it comes through. It's going to be Republicans, maybe if they're lucky, picking up 10 to 12 seats in a year. You know, that's one of the worst midterm performances by a party out of power in the last 50 years. So, yes, I think eventually it will get to a Republican House, but it'll get to a Republican House with majorities that are too narrow to do much of anything with.
I'm talking with Henry Olson of the Ethics and Public Policy Center, my colleague at the Washington Post. Henry, I do have enormous relief if Kevin McCarthy is Speaker, because the Supreme Court will not be assaulted. Even if Laxalt loses and Warnock wins, they will not have the votes in the House to change the Supreme Court. So the rule of law will survive for a while. Do you agree with me on that?
Oh, absolutely. No, I think a Republican majority in the House is absolutely essential. It's just that it's different legislating with 10 seats as a majority than with 30 seats as a majority. And I just think it really puts the kibosh on all of the hyper-aggressive moves that a lot of people have been talking about. It's just not smart to do when you've got such a narrow majority. But blocking stuff by the Democrats, absolutely, that's safe.
Now, I got to ask you, do you see any of the threat to democracy stuff having worked? I want to be very clear-eyed about what worked for Democrats and what didn't. Right now, I think it's candidates and punishing people who are looking to 2020 elections. And I don't think it's a demand for more spending. I don't think it's a demand for anything on the Democratic agenda at all. What do you think?
No, I don't think it's really a demand for anything on the Democratic agenda. The exit polls said that the second most important issue after inflation was abortion. And so, to the extent it's a vote for anything on the Democratic agenda, it's a vote for, hey, we'd kind of like to keep abortion legal. And you take a look at the 5 states that had abortion referenda, and the pro-abortion right side won all 5, even in the state of Kentucky. So, to the extent there's any legislative meaning out of it, I think it's, upset at the Dobbs decision. I don't think the democracy thing had much of an effect at all, except among mobilizing already partisan Democrats.
And who would have voted? They're like glass-crawling Republicans. They vote anyway. That's why I've always thought the abortion was a wash. Pro-lifers are out there. Pro-choice absolutists are out there. But if you put, Democrats do see a path here, Henry. Just put any initiative up that says we're guaranteeing a woman's right to choose, and it will win, even though they don't know what it means.
People would like to have the idea of a woman's right to choose, and they are backing these things, and the pro-life side is not making a good case or not making a strong enough case as to why giving a blank check like that is a bad idea.
Republicans did fail here, and they may have failed because they did not prepare the argument in favor of limiting absolute abortion. They may get better at that going forward. In terms of national security, Henry, I think Xi is the happiest man on the planet because we're not going to rebuild the military with this Congress.
Not to the extent that we need to. I mean, you talk about increasing military spending by 4 or 5% a year over Biden's paltry request, which is what the Congress has been able to do. That's not enough. We're going to have to wait for another new president in order to get the military buildup that we really need.
Looking ahead to a Georgia runoff, does the Supreme Court play an issue at a significant enough role to make that a centerpiece?
I think that's one of the questions that Republicans are going to have to ask is, I think that protecting the court from being packed is a good issue. The question is, how can you tie Warnock to it? And that's not something that's easy to do. You only got 4 weeks, and I think you got to go with your best shot. But as one of the many things to talk about, it's something that can certainly motivate Republicans. And generally, people don't want to mess around with the Supreme Court.
Do you think it is a sufficiently nationalized race that they just view it as control of the Senate?
I think if Laxalt wins, it will be viewed as a nationalized race, and it will basically be, do you want to have the Democrats in control, or do you want to give the Republicans a full block on Biden? And I'm not sure how the voters of Georgia will think about that. Certainly Walker did much better than a lot of people thought he would about 3 weeks ago, and it could very well be that there were Republican focus groups that found that people who were going to vote for the third party in the first round said if it was going to go to a runoff, that they would vote for Walker. And that's kind of the hope here, is that a lot of those libertarian votes are people who really didn't want to vote for Walker, but if they're forced to, they will. And a lot rides on that.
So, Henry, looking forward here, if you have to summarize this, what do you think off-year elections get 2 lines? George Bush didn't lose because of 9/11. Obama lost in 2010 because of Obamacare. What's the 2 lines going to be on 2022?
I think the 2 lines are that Biden dodged a bullet and focused attention on Trump and the Republican Party. And
it was it the overtime of the 2020 election?
For too many people, it was, yes.
Yeah, and the Republicans lost in overtime of the 2020 election. We demanded in too many places that we relitigate 2020, and too many places said, okay, we'll relitigate 2020. Here you go. Henry, go to sleep, friend. You've done yeoman's work. Last night, I was relying on Henry Olson more than anybody else, more than Decision Desk, more than Dave Wasserman, who's working for NBC. Thank you, Henry. Get some sleep. Coming right back. I'm Hugh Hewitt, joined by United States Senator Tom Cotton. First, Senator Cotton, your general reaction to the results of last night.
Well, Hugh, Warren Zevon is a great lead-in. I think we'll be doing it in Georgia for another month as well. Be a lot of lawyers and money in Georgia, and if you care about your guns in Georgia, you're certainly going to need to get out and vote for Herschel Walker in the runoff. So, Hugh, I would say obviously the election results were not the big smashing blowout victory we had hoped for. but a lot of successes. First off, and most important from my standpoint in the Senate, is the Senate is still up for grabs. I think Adam Laxalt will pull it out in Nevada. Ron Johnson, I think, is just waiting for a call. That puts us at 50 seats, and that means that, as it was in 2020, it'll come down to a runoff in Georgia, and I think Herschel Walker, with all of our support, can win that runoff in early December. In the House of Representatives, it looks like we're going to take the majority. There's a lot of seats, especially on the West Coast, still waiting to be counted. But we had real good nights in Florida and in New York in particular, picking up House seats there. So we're going to be able to put the brakes on the Biden agenda. And then obviously we had some Republicans who had accomplished a lot in office, who had delivered results. And I think that's what a lot of the American people are looking for, especially our governors. If you look at Ron DeSantis' huge victory in Florida, Brian Kemp running up the score against Stacey Abrams, Greg Abbott's reelection, Mike DeWine's smashing victory in Ohio, in your home state. We had a lot of voters coming out and rewarding Republicans who had effectively steered their states through difficult times over these last 4 years, even in places where we came up short, like my good friend Lee Zeldin, who still ran a great race in New York. He helped us carry across many House members, as I said. So although it wasn't the huge victory a lot of us hoped for, a lot of bright spots, and I think we'll get back to work in the Georgia election next month, and then hopefully we'll have a Senate and a House majority and begin to deliver on an agenda that can help reverse the damage that Joe Biden and the Democrats have caused this country on the last 4 years. Kind of like what I lay out in Only the Strong, to rebuild our military and secure our border, to achieve energy independence, to crack down on crime in our streets.
Now, Senator Cotton, you announced earlier this week you will not be seeking the presidency in 2024. I wanted to confirm that for our audience. And you did it before this election. It got nothing to do with this election. Would you just explain it to people so they hear it from you and not from me?
Sure, Hugh. Ann and I had reflected and prayed on the decision over the last couple months. But as our boys, who are 7 and 5, were back in school, and I was on the campaign trail, we began to realize it's a particularly challenging time to be gone 6 or 7 days a week for 2 years. You know, if they were 4 years younger, they probably wouldn't even be aware that I was gone. And if they were 4 years older, they would understand why it matters and why the sacrifice is worth it, in addition to being able to travel and participate on the campaign trail. So I'm pretty confident Republican primary voters can find another nominee, and probably a pretty good one. But I know for sure that my boys can't find another dad for the next 2 years. And as my 7-year-old Gabriel learns to hit the fastball in Little League over these next 2 years, and my 5-year-old Daniel learns to read, I want to be there to help teach them those things. And I wanted to make that known to all the many generous, kind supporters who encouraged me to run over the years before this midterm election or before the presidential election gets underway, because our decision was about our family. Not closing the book entirely on potential future campaigns, but closing the 24 chapter, and going to keep working hard in the United States Senate for the great people of Arkansas, who, if I could just flag one other big victory last night to you, I'm extremely thankful that the good people of Arkansas, level-headed, very sensible, rejected a recreational marijuana initiative.
I also want to thank the good people of Arkansas for putting Sarah Huckabee Sanders in the State House. You have a great partner and a governor, your colleague, your seatmate from Arkansas, also winning re-election. And Sarah's going to be a superstar for everyone who needs a superstar to come in for them, as is Governor DeSantis. I think that the biggest winner of the night for the Republicans is Governor DeSantis and Sarah Huckabee Sanders. Ted Budd won. I know you helped him out. And Ron Johnson won. I know you helped him out. But we didn't get over the line in New Hampshire or Pennsylvania or Tiffany Smiley or Joe O'Dea. What do you think held them back, Tom Cotton?
Yeah, those are some disappointing losses, especially disappointed about Tiffany Smiley. I've known Tiffany and Scotty now for a few years. They've been great champions for our veterans. And I was with her and her kids on the campaign trail late last week. I think in the end, in some ways, we saw a replay of the 2020 election and the Georgia runoffs in 2020. I think it's probably fitting that we're going to have another Georgia runoff. We just have a closely divided country. And our candidates who have a record in particular, have able to deliver results for the people, performed really well last night. Like we talked about earlier, some of the governors like Ron DeSantis and Greg Abbott, Mike DeWine, some of our senators as well. Marco Rubio won a smashing victory in Florida, as Tim Scott did in South Carolina, and Ron Johnson won in very tough circumstances in Wisconsin. So, like I said, I think in some ways it's a bit of a replay of the 2020 election in a closely divided nation. And small differences can make a big difference. We had some great candidates in districts that were hard to win, like Hung Cao in Northern Virginia, a district that Joe Biden won by double digits. He almost pulled it off, but that's just a tough district. You had Benjamin Netanyahu on for a great interview earlier this week, and he finally just pulled out a victory after 5 elections in recent years in Israel. In some ways, it's the same dynamic. So some small differences here and there in districts can make a very big difference in what is otherwise a closely divided country and has been now for a few election cycles.
Now, plates are grinding each other, and eventually one gives and one doesn't. And we are in a 50-50 country, and the Senate of the United States will matter. So I don't see any retirements from the Supreme Court in the next 2 years. I don't think we're going to have a knockdown, but we really need Herschel to stop the worst judges. And I think that is the message, that we've got to save the courts, and Herschel Walker is the guy to say. If it comes down to that and Adam Laxalt wins, let me talk to you about the NRSC looking forward. Who is going to run the NRSC for the next cycle when so many seats are held by Democrats and they're fighting what Republicans basically had to fight, a multi-front war this year?
So right now, the only candidate of which I'm aware is Steve Daines, an outstanding senator from Montana. When we're back in Washington next week in session, we'll start to have our leadership choices. Like I said, I'm not aware of anyone other than Steve Daines running for that. I was on the campaign trail with him. Steve is a very accomplished senator, knows how to win tough races. He was in one of those races in 2020 that the Democrats spent tens of millions of dollars on, yet he pulled it out by a substantial margin. And as you say, we've got a lot of great pickup opportunities around the country. As luck would have it, many of those states, like West Virginia and Pennsylvania, Ohio, New Mexico, Montana, are big energy producing states. And as I outline in Only the Strong, energy independence is not just vital for our prosperity here at home, but it's also vital for our national security and support for our allies abroad. So with a new Republican House and hopefully a new Republican Senate after the Georgia runoff, I think that should be one of our priority issues.
Senator, let's talk about China for a second. The happiest man on the planet last night was President Xi, because you've made the case in Only the Strong, and we talked about it all last week. We have to plus up defense spending. We have to get serious about it. And I'm not sure even a 1-vote margin in the Senate will allow us to do that, because we have some senators who are very leery of defense spending on our team. And the House has got some isolationists, just outright isolationists. I don't think we have any isolationists in the Republican caucus in the Senate. But what do you think? Even if we get Georgia and Nevada, is it possible that we can plus up defense to where it needs to be, as you outlined in Only the Strong?
Hugh, I hope so. The biggest obstacle, of course, is the Democrats. And it's not just that they're opposed to more spending on defense, but they're willing to hold defense spending hostage. As I explain in Only the Strong, defense spending is different from other kinds of spending. You can't base your strategy on your budget. You have to base your budget on your strategy, which is based on the threats you face, and the threat we face from China is grave. So we got some good new Republican senators coming on. You had J.D. Vance on the show the other day, and he made some outstanding points, similar to what I've been making for years, about the need to spend more on commercial off-the-shelf technology and take advantage of our cutting-edge tech sector here in America. Some of that you see happening in Ukraine right now with things like the Starlink internet systems or custom-made 3D printed drones. We need more of that in our Department of Defense, as opposed to multi-decade, multi-trillion-dollar programs that seem off budget and over time. Unfortunately, Democrats don't see it that way. They're willing to hold up and delay defense spending unless they get the same amount of domestic and typically welfare spending they want. So we'll see what some of those Democrats in vulnerable states, states that were close one way or the other in the election last night, have to say when we get back in the cycle. But of course, if we control both the House and the Senate, we'll be able to set the terms of debate and bring the bills to the floor and force those Democrats to take a position on it.
So Republicans are disappointed because my original numbers of R+1 and the House by 25 are not coming true. We might get the R+1 in the Senate, but we're not going to make 25. What do you tell to a disappointed Republican this morning?
Well, as we said, obviously we all wanted a big smashing victory. I would have liked it a lot more than R+1 and R+20 or 25 in the House. But we shouldn't undermine or underestimate just how significant it is to control the House of Representatives, even if it's a smaller majority than one might like, or for that matter, if we can win the Georgia runoff, to be able to control the Senate. I mean, that sets the terms of debate. That allows us to stop the worst of the Biden legislative agenda. I saw this in 2013, 2014, my one term in the House of Representatives when we had a Republican House. Didn't accomplish everything we wanted, of course, but we were able to control the agenda in the House of Representatives. And that's a huge victory coming off 2 years of overreach by the Democrats in Washington. So I know that there's a lot of races that people would like to win, but again, small shifts in the electorate here and there can make a big difference. And I think we're going to see that again as we head into this runoff in Georgia. I would just encourage all of your listeners to be prepared for that, to do what they can to pitch in a few bucks. If they're in Georgia, maybe help get out the vote. And if they're not in Georgia, it's nice down there this time of year, so you can go vacation a little bit.
And not only that, everybody who can is going to go to Georgia and help. I may have to go down to AM 920 and set up there. Last question for you, Senator Cotton. Polling was off again. This time it was off in the Republicans' favor. Are we ever going to is it worth using for anybody?
Well, as I told a lot of folks leading up to the election, I wouldn't want to count on polling error one way or the other. It better be far ahead, as you once wrote. If it's not close, they can't cheat. So it's always better to win, the way Sarah Huckabee or the way John Bozeman won in Arkansas last night. But yeah, polling is a mercurial thing, and it can be very difficult, especially as fewer and fewer people have landlines, and more don't pick up unknown numbers. So the best thing you can do, I think, from the results last night, obviously, is just be a strong, effective leader that delivers results for your people, a growing, prosperous economy and safe streets and sound schools for kids. That's what you saw in Brian Kemp's big victory in Georgia, Ron DeSantis' victory in Florida, Greg Abbott's victory in Texas, DeWine's victory in Ohio, plus a lot of our senators who have been great and effective leaders in the Senate, like Tim Scott and Marco Rubio.
Blocking and tackling, it still matters. Senator Tom Cotton, keep coming back, and I hope only the strong continues to sell. Maybe we'll actually persuade some Democrats to try and deter Xi from taking Taiwan. We will find out. Senator Tom Cotton, Only the Strong, still available at Amazon.com. Thanks for joining me on an election morn where everyone was up late. The indispensable Jim Geraghty joins us now of National Review fame. You were reading him in the Washington Post this week as well. Jim, you wrote a column on what's going to happen if the Republicans win. Are the Republicans going to win the House?
Yeah, it's going to be a much smaller majority than they expected. I had them picking up 23 seats, and that looks like it's on the generous side based on what we know so far. People who were thinking 30, 40, 50, I think Newt Gingrich at one point was saying 60. That was always unrealistic, in part because they were starting from a higher floor and there just weren't that many competitive races. But this was a big Republican underperformance. This is a disappointment just based on the results. And it is a colossal debacle based on the scale of opportunity they had.
Yeah, we've done this before. Every 10 years we do this, right? When we forget candidate quality. But the House candidates were pretty good. I mean, you don't get better than Jen Ruth Green. You just don't. She ran a great campaign in Indiana, won, but the Blues came out and she lost fairly significantly. She conceded. There are a lot of good candidates who didn't win. I've seen anywhere from a House Republican majority of 2 to 17. Have you broken down the numbers yet? I mean, California, we won't know for days.
Yeah, I think it's almost. I don't want to say a fool's exercise. I just think until we get more results from the West Coast, we're just not going to have a good sense of that. But look, based on what we saw here on the East Coast, there were 3 competitive races here in Virginia. Virginia, you could say easy, medium, and hard. Right, easy was that Newport News, Virginia Beach.
Jen Kiggins.
Yeah, your Republicans won that one. The race in the middle of the state was, okay, if you have a decent-sized wave against Spanberger, Republicans felt, a little short in that one. Hung Kao, out in the kind of closer to where I am, the suburbs, ran a good campaign and came within 5 in a district that Biden had won very heavily. So, okay, that was the one you were only going to get in the red tsunami scenario. But, Alan Fung in Rhode Island, a lot of these races, they were close but no cigar. But I think it's really disappointing because you look at the fundamentals, right? The state of the economy, high inflation. Like the exit polls said, Americans were really upset about the economy, really upset about inflation, really upset about gas prices. This was the near ideal issue environment for Republicans. and they might be able to eke out a House majority. That is a major underperformance considering the overall, the way the table was set for them heading into this election day.
And Jim, we want the Republican Party to win. We want the country to be more conservative than it is, but it isn't. And I don't know that we persuaded anybody that Dobbs was correctly decided. I don't think that we tried.
Yeah, no, I look, there are a bunch of lessons people can take from this, but I'm looking at this morning. Would McCormick have been a stronger candidate than Oz in Pennsylvania and not had this question of, hey, he's not even from here? I kind of think that seems reasonable. Would
Yes.
Morse have been a more competitive candidate than Don Bolduc up against New Hampshire? Maggie Hassan is not a whirling dervish of raw political charisma, and neither is Mark Kelly. Blake Masters looks like roadkill out there. Would Mark Brnovich, the state attorney general, have been a stronger candidate out there?
Would Doug Ducey have been the best candidate out there?
Yeah, but he wasn't running. I mean,
Right.
There were better options in the Republican primary. And Republican primary voters said, no, we know better. Trust us. We're going to go with the Trumpier one. We're going to go with the louder one. We're going to go with the one that emotes and pounds the table and looks better on Fox News. And look where it got us.
Okay, Tom Cotton just said we might get the Senate. It's going to come down to, he's feeling good about Laxalt. Are you, by the way, do you share optimism about Laxalt, as does Henry Olson and Tom Cotton?
Yeah. I mean, the floor for Republicans is about 50-50, but that's still, the status quo, and it's not that good. 51-49 is possible. If those two things happen, it's still pretty good. But again, they left winnable races on the table, and it's just so frustrating. And a lot of this is at the feet of Trump, and a lot of this is at the feet of, basically this idea of we know better. We don't need normal candidates. I mean, Mike DeWine romped. I'm glad J.D. Vance won. He won by about the same margin as Trump, but Vance romped. Sununu romped in New Hampshire. Kemp won huge by a very solid margin in Georgia. And obviously we've got the Ron DeSantis, turning the state, blood red crimson and just, smearing the entrails of Charlie Crist all over the highway. I mean, I'm baffled that anybody would look at this and say, should we run the guy who lost to Joe Biden next time, or should we go against this guy who just demolished the Democratic Party in Florida?
Yeah. Brian Kemp did win, and it's very interesting to me. Herschel ran a good campaign. He got hit 3 times by late hits. Do they last into December, Jim? This is not a January race. It's a 4 weeks from now race. What do you think?
I think if the perception is that the control of the Senate is at stake, then I think, Herschel Walker wins. If Republicans, and I guess now it probably would come down to that. I'm trying to think, if it was just that, if the control of the Senate was resolved, I think Warnock would have a better shot.
We will see. Jim Geraghty, I'll continue to read your very funny Twitter feed, and thank you for not getting me fined by FCC, because your Twitter feed would absolutely get me fined. Adam and Dwayne and Jacob, thank you. Up all night and working hard. So am I. Thank you, America. I'll be back tomorrow. We'll get some final numbers, I hope, in the House by then, or at least certainty that it's Speaker McCarthy and that it's down to Georgia. We'll know by, I think, tomorrow morning on the next Hugh Hewitt Show.